Hey everyone, and welcome. Today, we're diving into a chapter that is absolutely critical for your exams, reproductive health. Seriously, whether you're aiming for that top score in your boards or a fantastic rank in NEET, you have got to know this chapter inside and out. So, we're going to break down every single concept, every piece of data, and every mechanism, straight from your NCERT textbook to make sure you're totally prepared.
So, let's kick things off with a big question. We hear the phrase reproductive health all the time, right? But what does it really truly mean? Is it just about not having any diseases in your reproductive system, or is there more to it? And think bigger for a second. Why does the health of individuals matter so much for the progress of an entire society? Let's keep these questions in mind as we go.
Here's a quick look at our game plan. We'll start with the basics. What is reproductive health, and what are the strategies to improve it? Then we'll tackle the huge topic of population growth and birth control. After that, we have a super detailed breakdown of all the contraceptive methods. You really want to pay close attention there. It's a goldmine for exam questions. And finally, we'll cover medical termination of pregnancy, MTP, and sexually transmitted infections, or STIs. Sound good? Let's get started.
First things first, let's lay down a solid foundation. We need to understand what reproductive health actually is, what kinds of problems we face, and what strategies have been put in place, especially here in India, to tackle them.
Okay, so the World Health Organization, the WHO, gives us a really broad definition, and this is key. Reproductive health isn't just about the physical stuff, having healthy organs. It's a state of total well-being. That means it includes the physical, emotional, behavioral, and social aspects of reproduction. So a reproductively healthy society is one where people can not only have children, but they also have the knowledge, the freedom, and the emotional support to make smart, responsible choices about it.
And India was actually a pioneer in this. Pretty incredible, right? As far back as 1951, India was one of the very first countries in the world to start national family planning programs. And these weren't just set-it-and-forget-it plans. They were constantly checked and improved over the years. Today, they've grown into something much bigger and more comprehensive, called the Reproductive and Child Health Care, or RCH programs.
So what are these RCH programs trying to do? Well, their goals are huge. You can think of it in a few parts. First, there's education and awareness. This means using things like TV and newspapers, and maybe most importantly, bringing proper sex education into schools to give kids the right information. Second, it's about providing support and facilities, so people have access to clinics for things like birth control or care after childbirth. And third, it's about social change, tackling really tough issues like sex abuse to help build a society that's genuinely healthy and responsible.
Now, as part of modern healthcare, we've got some powerful tools at our disposal, like amniocentesis. Medically speaking, this is an incredibly valuable technique. What happens is a tiny sample of the amniotic fluid around the fetus is taken, and the fetal cells in it are analyzed. This can help detect certain genetic disorders like Down syndrome or sickle cell anemia, which gives parents really important information about the health of their unborn child.
So if amniocentesis is such a useful medical tool, why on earth is it banned for finding out the sex of the baby in India? Well, unfortunately, this amazing technology was being misused in a really tragic way. People were using it to find out if the fetus was female, and then, in many cases, illegally aborting them. To fight this awful practice of female foeticide, a strict legal ban had to be put in place. And India has also been a big player in the science here. A perfect example, and listen up because this is a classic exam question, is the oral contraceptive pill called Sahelli. It was actually developed right here in India by scientists at the Central Drug Research Institute, or CDRI, in Lucknow. It just goes to show how local research can have a huge impact on public health.
All right, time to shift gears. Let's see how all of this connects to one of the biggest challenges the world has ever faced, something that affects every single one of us. The population explosion, and why birth control became so important.
Just look at this chart for a second. The growth is mind-boggling. Back in 1900, the entire world had about 2 billion people. In just 100 years, by 2000, it had tripled to 6 billion. Wow. And it kept climbing, hitting 7.2 billion by 2011. This happened because of better healthcare, sanitation, and food, which meant death rates, including for mothers and infants, dropped dramatically.
India saw a very similar story. We had about 350 million people at the time of independence. By May 2011, that number had exploded to over 1.2 billion. Now, you might see that less than 2% growth rate and think, hey, that's not so bad. But think about it. When you have a population of over a billion, even a tiny percentage means millions and millions of new people every year. And that puts a huge strain on everything: Food, water, housing, jobs, you name it.
So, to deal with this, the government really pushed for awareness. One of the most famous slogans you probably still hear about is Hum Do, Hamara Do, which means we too, our too. This simple message was everywhere, on posters, on TV, just trying to encourage couples to have smaller families, ideally with 2 children, to help stabilize the population.
Okay, so this brings us right to contraception. But before we list all the different methods, let's do a little NCERT pop quiz. It's a super common question. What makes a contraceptive ideal? Like if you could design the perfect birth control method, what features would it have? Take a second and think about it.
All right, did you get them? According to your textbook, the perfect contraceptive should be easy to use and easy to get. Obviously, it has to be really effective at preventing pregnancy. It should also be reversible, meaning you can stop using it and become fertile again. And this is a big one. It should have little to no side effects. Finally, it shouldn't get in the way of a person's sex drive or sexual experience. So these are the goals we're shooting for.
Okay, get ready because this next part is the absolute core of the chapter. I can pretty much guarantee you'll see questions on this in both your boards and NEET. We're going to break down all the major contraceptive methods one by one. Pay really close attention to how each one works. That's the key.
Let's start with the natural methods. The basic idea here is simple. Just avoid letting the sperm and egg meet. First, you have periodic abstinence. This means avoiding intercourse during the fertile window of the menstrual cycle, which is roughly day 10 to day 17. Then there's withdrawal, or coitus interruptus, where the male pulls out right before ejaculation. And third is lactational amenorrhea, which is pretty cool. After giving birth, intense breastfeeding can naturally stop ovulation for up to 6 months. The great thing about these methods? No side effects. The downside? The failure rates can be pretty high.
All right, let's talk about barrier methods. The name says it all, right? They create a physical barrier to block sperm. The most famous one, of course, is the condom. They're usually made of thin rubber or latex and are available for both males and females. The government in India heavily promoted a brand of male condoms you should definitely remember for your exams, Narode.
Okay, and this is huge. This is a massive advantage that you have to remember for your exams. Besides just preventing pregnancy, condoms are the only method that also protects you from sexually transmitted infections, or STIs, and that includes HIV/AIDS. That dual protection is a game changer. Plus, they're easy to get, you can put them on yourself, and they're disposable. The only catch is they have to be used correctly every single time to work well.
Now, besides female condoms, there are a few other barrier methods just for women. These include things called diaphragms, cervical caps, and vaults. They're all made of rubber and are inserted into the vagina to cover the cervix before sex. The idea is just to physically block sperm from getting into the uterus. Unlike condoms, these are reusable. And to make them even more effective, they're often used with spermicidal creams or jellies that kill sperm.
Okay, moving on to something that's super common and really effective, especially here in India, intrauterine devices, or IUDs. You can see a picture of a copper T right here. These are little devices that have to be inserted into the uterus by a doctor or a trained nurse. But once they're in, they can work for years, which makes them incredibly convenient.
Now this table right here, you need to know it inside and out for your exams. I'm not kidding. IUDs come in 3 main types. First, you have the non-medicated ones, like the lips loop. They basically increase the number of immune cells in the uterus that eat up sperm. Second, you have copper-releasing IUDs, like the copper T or Q7. The copper ions they release are toxic to sperm. They stop them from swimming well and from being able to fertilize an egg. And third, there are hormone-releasing IUDs, like NCERT. They release hormones that make the uterus a bad place for an embryo to implant, and they also make the cervical mucus really thick so sperm can't get through.
All right, let's switch over to hormonal methods, and we'll start with the one everyone's heard of, oral contraceptives, or more simply, the pill. These are basically tablets that contain small doses of hormones, either just a progestogen or a mix of progestogen and estrogen.
So, how do they work? Well, you have to take 1 pill every day for 21 days, starting in the first few days of your period. Then you take a 7-day break when you get your period, and then you start a new pack. The hormones in the pill do a few things. They stop ovulation from happening, they change the lining of the uterus so an embryo can't implant, and they thicken the cervical mucus to block sperm. Pretty effective. And remember Saheli? That's a special once-a-week pill with very few side effects.
But taking a pill every day isn't the only way. You can also get these same kinds of hormones through an injection or as a tiny implant that goes under the skin, like you see here. The way they work is pretty much the same as the pill. The big difference is that they last a lot longer.
You can get an injection or an implant and be protected from pregnancy for months or even years. Now, it's really important we talk about emergency contraception. And the key word here is emergency. This isn't your regular day-to-day birth control. It's used as a backup plan, say if a condom breaks or after unprotected sex. It could be a high-dose pill or even an IUD. But the most critical thing to remember is the timing. For it to work, it has to be used within 72 hours. That's 3 days of intercourse.
Okay, last but not least, we have the surgical methods, also called sterilization. These are generally for people who are sure they don't want any more children, which is why it's called a terminal method. It's incredibly effective, but, and this is a big but, it's very difficult to reverse, so it's a decision that needs a lot of careful thought.
The procedure for males is called a vasectomy, and for females, it's a tubectomy. In a vasectomy, the tubes that carry sperm, the vas deferens, are cut or tied. It's a simple procedure that just blocks the sperm from getting out. In a tubectomy, the fallopian tubes are cut or tied, which stops the egg from being able to meet the sperm. Both are permanent and highly effective ways to prevent pregnancy.
Okay, we're going to move into our next section now, which covers a really important and sometimes sensitive topic, medical termination of pregnancy, or MTP. You might also know it as induced abortion. We're going to stick strictly to what the NCERT textbook says about the definition, the law, and the safety.
To give you an idea of the scale of this, the textbook points out that an estimated 45 to 50 million MTPs are performed around the world every single year. That's a huge number. It works out to about 1 out of every 5 pregnancies, and whether it should be legal or not is still a massive debate in many places, filled with all sorts of emotional, ethical, and religious questions.
Here in India, the government legalized MTP way back in 1971, but with very strict rules. The whole point was to prevent people from misusing it, especially for female foeticide, and to stop women from dying from unsafe back-alley abortions. The law was updated again in 2017. Basically, MTP is allowed under certain conditions, like if the pregnancy is the result of rape or contraceptive failure, or if it's a danger to the mother's life or the fetus has severe problems.
Now, from a safety perspective, this is something you absolutely have to know. MTPs are considered relatively safe if they're done by a proper doctor during the first trimester, which is up to 12 weeks of pregnancy. However, second trimester abortions are a lot riskier and more complicated. That's why having access to legal and safe MTP services early on is so important. It saves lives.
And that brings us to our final major topic, which is deeply connected to reproductive health. Sexually transmitted infections, or STIs. We'll quickly go over what they are, see some common examples, and talk about how they're spread and prevented.
The definition is pretty straightforward. STIs are infections that are passed from person to person, mainly through sexual contact. You might also hear older names for them, like venereal diseases or VD, or the broader term reproductive tract infections, RTI. They all pretty much refer to the same thing.
Your textbook lists several common STIs you should know, like gonorrhea, syphilis, genital herpes, and of course HIV, which causes AIDS. Now, it's really important to remember that some of these, especially hepatitis B and HIV, can also be spread in other ways, like sharing needles through blood transfusions or from an infected mother to her baby. The good news is that, except for genital herpes, hepatitis B, and HIV, most of these are completely curable if you catch them early and get proper treatment.
And there you have it. We've covered everything from the real meaning of reproductive health to population control, contraceptive methods, MTP, and STIs. As you study for your exams, just remember, this isn't only about getting good marks. This is knowledge that empowers you to make smart, healthy, and responsible choices throughout your life, for your own good and for the good of everyone around you. Use what you've learned to help build a healthier future. Thanks for joining me.